I've been saying and hinting at this for some time now, and I hope people are ready. I hope people have prayed, are praying, have picked up fasting to some degree, or are planning on restoring some Catholic fasting in their lives this Advent, in preparation for two things mainly. One, the Vatican is preparing for the next conclave, and frankly, they've been preparing for it for quite some time. And they want to make sure that the next pope is, basically, Pope Francis II. The second thing that is coming is another period without the Mass. We need to be prepared for that scenario because when we as a church largely fasted from the Eucharist this year, there were some parishes that remained open due to some strange internal disagreements among traditionally minded Catholics. Many didn't just darken their doors of those parishes, and I don't know why. I'm hoping that despite a concerted effort by some in our circles, you'll consider the alternative when the next involuntary fast from the Eucharist comes down from the bishops. Let's get into these stories because they are related. But first, I wanted to say thanks to the patrons of this channel, whose support keeps these messages coming. Your support is deeply appreciated. If you want to support the work of this channel, especially in these times when Catholic voices for truth are quietly being pushed aside and things seem very uncertain, you can do so by clicking that join button below your screen if you're on YouTube, or by joining us on Patreon or Subscribestar. Options in general are in the description box of this podcast episode. Supporting the work of Catholic Voices helps keep these messages coming. So thank you, and again, thank you to our patrons of this channel. Now, on to our story. Let's start with the coming conclave. Well, I know that for whatever reason, people actually buy into the so-called prophecy of St. Malachi, people forget a couple things about life and prophecy. First, even approved apparitions, we are not to spend all that much time trying to apply to everyday life and to looking for their signs coming to fruition. The Church says that we will actually know the veracity and truth of approved apparitions once they have come to pass, their full meaning, all of it. And that means after the fact. Second, we are to carry on with our lives seeking sanctity and living both simultaneously, like each day could be the last, as well as living each day in anticipation of the next. Frankly, this means that the Vatican is planning another conclave, and we should assume that they know something that we don't, and then we're very, very likely to have a new pope in, if I had to guess, 2022 or so. Early in his papacy, Francis hinted at retiring, like Benedict, though I, for one, cannot see him retiring. He is very much a traditionalist in his view of the papacy and the role of it in the church. He just seems to want to apply that to the world and to use the driving idea of the council and his papacy. Having opened the windows of the church to the world for some fresh air, as John the 23rd said, Francis wants to bring in the world to the church, which, if we were talking about the fruits of evangelization and spreading the gospel, would be great. But that's not exactly what we're talking about. Clearly, he wants to bring some utopian thinking of the world into the church, and that work must carry on beyond him. That much is clear. So the planning for the next papal conclave has commenced, and in fact has been going on for some time. This became clear when, in early 2019, Francis named a new Camerlengo, and the name of that person will be familiar to you if you've been paying attention to the McCarrick story, and that name is Kevin Farrell. But first, let's talk about what a Camerlengo is. The Reuters article announcing the appointment of Farrell almost 2 years ago to the post describes this in the terms we need for our purposes today. Quote, the Camerlengo or Chamberlain runs the ordinary affairs of the Vatican city-state during the period known as sede vacante, empty seat. While the position is steeped in tradition and rituals, he cannot make any major decisions and cannot change the teachings of the Church. End quote. What they don't mention is that the Camerlengo is critical to the running of the conclave itself. The administrator of Vatican City has access to the most basic functions of the city, including assigning prelates to housing for their visits for the conclave, where meetings will be held and all manner of things that would seem dreadfully boring to normal people in normal circumstances, but in these situations comes with a large amount of influence. Which brings us to Cardinal Farrell, who is the highest-ranking American prelate in Vatican City, and possibly the highest-ranking American citizen to ever hold an official position at the Holy See. But this brings us to Uncle Ted. You see, the Camerlengo, Kevin Farrell, served under him when he was a priest in the Archdiocese of the Capital from 1984 to 2007. Uncle Ted elevated him to the position of auxiliary bishop, and was then his roommate thereafter. Well, literally his roommate. They lived in the same rectory. In 2007, he was made the Archbishop of Dallas and had his ecclesial coat of arms serve as a tribute to Uncle Ted by including his coat of arms within his very own. That's also very strange. Clearly, this man is the biggest fan of Uncle Ted, which makes it all the more curious when he said deadpan into a camera how surprised he was when the news about Uncle Ted came out to the public. Go figure. But Cardinal Kevin Farrell is now the one who is in charge of operating Vatican City for the next conclave. Be assured of how well this will turn out, and then bear in mind that Francis has elevated 57% of the cardinals who will be the main minds at that next conclave. As someone said recently, this is still very much Uncle Ted's church. Then factor in that there have been 2 key elevations in the last year. Cardinal Tagle was given a key position in the Roman Curia a year ago, the head of the Congregation for Evangelization, which comes with a great deal of prestige in the Curia and will enable him to be taken seriously as a potential Francis II. The second elevation was, as I talked about last week in a video, was the elevation of now Cardinal Zuppi, who I described as a James Martin-style bishop, and he is now a cardinal. He is charismatic and fully on board James Martin's architectural projects to build bridges, and it helps his case that Catholic opinion makers are talking about him positively as being a very papabile. So there you go. But there are other signs. Francis isn't exactly a young pontiff. Given the current situation, he must be feeling that time might be short. He has only one lung, which, all things considered, is a key sign that he might be preparing for the need for a Francis II. And make no mistake about this either. Unless something changes, Francis will be followed by Francis II, short of some kind of divine intervention. Given how wild a ride 2020 has been, that could be what happens to cap off the year. But we'll see. Besides, 2021 may be just as wild, but no one wants to have that conversation yet. Which brings me to this. In several places right now, the Mass is no longer accessible to the faithful, at least from diocesan masses and groups like the FSSP, the Institute of Christ the King, and even from some monasteries. Why? Because the bishop has decided to go along with Caesar. This is the second time this has happened, of course. Francis himself, for the first time possibly ever, decided that the Masses for the Nativity of the Lord are not necessary this year and has made them private, with, of course, them being scheduled from Vatican City to be watched from, the comfort of your home on your television. This is coming to a parish near you. Maybe your diocese will have the Mass and sacraments available for Christmas. Maybe not. But if they do, what will you do? What will you do if the only sacraments and Masses available are from the SSPX? Will you go? Or will you follow the lead of those who have a bizarre antipathy towards the SSPX and haven't exactly been the most forthright and honest in how they talk about them? Will you keep yourself from the sacraments when they may be the only place they're available? And I'm not even remotely trying to say that the SSPX has been perfect in all of this either. In some places, they've joined the rest of them. But in others, they did not. In others, they made the sacraments available. And as an organization, they certainly have their problems. I don't deny that either. But they are not what either their most strident fans or their most verbal detractors make them out to be. They are simply a priestly fraternity who mostly keep their doors open for the faithful, for the traditional Mass, for the traditional sacraments. And the Vatican has said numerous times that the faithful may attend Mass with them. In my area, they were the only ones available, in fact, for quite some time. It may come to the point where you ask yourself some hard questions about the liturgy and the rest, if all of this does come to pass, and I honestly think it will, and I suspect it's going to happen before the end of the 2020. But the signs are already there. We have in the Vatican and elsewhere the Mass not being available again, and all signs point to this happening again just in time for Christmas for most people. What will you do? Canonically, the bishops don't actually have the ability to overrule our blessed Lord on keeping Sunday holy. So I'm genuinely curious. In my area, we'll have to see. I think our bishops here learned from the last time, so who knows really. Restoring the Faith had a good long live stream, by the way, where he's laid out the case for why this is probably happening soon, and it took him about 2 hours to do it, and he had a lot of evidence. I do recommend checking that out. And I have a link to that, in fact, in my show notes for today as well. So returntotradition.org, just like the name of my channel as it appears on your screen, .org. It'll take you to the show notes. It'll take you to my sources blog, where all my show notes are there, preserved for all time, so that you can easily find the show notes for a previous episode. But let me know what you think about this, and what you'll do if all of a sudden we get a repeat of what happened earlier in the year with the Mass. Thanks for listening. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.